Hello, welcome back to 40 Days with the Fathers. Today we're on the last letter of Ignatius, day 11, where he's writing personally to Polycarp rather than to the church as a whole. And this one addressed personally to him, to Polycarp, giving him advice and encouragement as a bishop, plus some instructions on marriage for the church, which are reminiscent of what Paul wrote in his letters as well. So this is the final letter by Ignatius, and it ends with him writing personally to his fellow bishop Polycarp, who's the Bishop of Smyrna, which I hope I'm saying right as well, which is modern day Izmir in Turkey. He was the leader of the church, which was in yesterday's reading. Whereas the previous letters were all written to the church as a whole with praise and exhortations of their bishops, this one is addressed directly to a bishop personally. Ignatius aims to encourage Polycarp in this letter by acknowledging his strengths and steadfast faith, and also reminding him of his duties and role as a bishop. There's a brief warning against those who seem worthy of credit, but actually teach strange doctrines, which may fill Polycarp with some apprehension. This warning would seem to be against the Docetism again, as in all of Ignatius' previous letters, which leads him to write this short creed about Christ just to reiterate the church's stance on the matter. And although it's only short, I do like it, especially for its parallelism. So, to quote, "Look for him who is above all time, eternal and invisible, yet who became visible for our sakes, impalpable yet and impassible, yet who became passible on our account, and who in every kind of way suffered for our sakes." So again, just reinforcing the fact that Jesus was real, physical person, not just a phantom or apparition or something. People could see him, feel him, touch him, he ate and drank, etc. So what follows this are a few instructions or advice, possibly to Polycarp, which isn't too unusual since Ignatius is the elder of the two bishops, probably well into his 70s by this point. Polycarp may be in his 40s, roughly from what we know when they were born, or when they died. We see the inverse of what previous letters had encouraged the church body to do, such as do nothing without the bishop. Where here we see that the same advice given to Polycarp, but from a leadership point of view. Let nothing be done without thy consent, he is told, but also not to do anything without the approval of God. The position of bishop was not one to be abused or taken lightly, and those who held that office were subject to God and to the leading of the Spirit all the more. Polycarp is encouraged to flee evil arts, or wicked practices, as other translations have it, but also to make sure that he preaches against such things in public. Within the rest of this chapter, there is a quick rundown of instructions concerning marriage and how to pass to those who want to be married or who already are. There are similar calls to marriage purity and relationships as Paul gives in Ephesians 5:25, which is likely what Ignatius had in mind when he wrote that Polycarp should encourage the men who love their wives even as the Lord of the church, but also to those who are unmarried and virgins that they should strive to remain in a state of purity. So another echo of Paul's teaching of marriage, which you can find in 1 Corinthians 7 verse 8. But there's definitely a change of thinking between what Paul wrote and what Ignatius says to Polycarp in the remainder of this chapter, where Paul says that it is better to marry and than to be aflame with passion in 1 Corinthians 7:9, with no other rules attached. Ignatius writes that those who wish to marry should plan to form their union with the approval of the bishop, so that it may be a godly coupling and not something formed after their own lust. So for all the times that Ignatius quotes Paul in his letters, it seems strange now that there's been a subtle change with regards to marriage, which departs slightly from Paul's instruction. Maybe this is a rule formed from the inference in what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 about widows who want to marry again. but only in the Lord, i.e. to other believers, or more explicitly in 2 Corinthians 6 verse 14, where he instructs that believers should not be unequally yoked or mismatched with unbelievers. But even when taking this into consideration, requiring permission from the bishop is a new one. Just thinking as I read this now that, Paul wrote that people should, in one of his Thessalonian letters, I think, to listen to him and follow what he teaches them in word and deed. So in his letters and in what he taught them in person, which we obviously don't know anymore because we weren't there. So potentially this is a teaching that was passed on that Paul didn't write down, and what he wrote was inferring what he taught. It's speculation. Maybe this is just new teaching that Ignatius is saying or has cropped up around his time. We'll never know. After this, there is a shift of audience in the letter, as it appears to go from talking personally to Polycarp to speaking to the whole congregation. Give ye heed to the bishop, chapter 6 begins, speaking of Polycarp in the third person and not by name. What follows is a familiar call to live in unity with one another, but said in words which are reminiscent once again of Paul. And to quote, labour together with one another, strive in company together, run together, suffer together, sleep together, not in that way, and awake together, as the stewards and associates and servants of God. Please ye, so the old English gets me sometimes, please ye him under whom ye fight, and from whom ye receive your wages. Let none of you be found a deserter. Let your baptism endure as your arms. Let your faith as your helmet, your love as your spear, your patience as a complete panoply. Let your works be the charge assigned to you, that you may receive a worthy recompense. Be long-suffering, therefore, with one another in meekness, as God is towards you. Sorry, I butchered that a little bit. All the these and ye's get me tongue-tied a bit. I don't know about you, but when reading this excerpt, I can almost feel the desire which Ignatius has towards his fellow churches, and his passion to see everyone live out that goal to have love for one another, which Jesus prayed for, so that everyone will know that they are Jesus' disciples in John 13. The closing chapters display more of this unity of the churches being lived out as their instructions to send various letters and messengers between the churches, far and wide, where Ignatius won't be able to make it, so that the message and teaching may be consistent. So the unity that he wants isn't necessarily just with one another personally, but doctrinally and teaching on a teaching level across the churches, so that they're all saying and doing the same thing. This is the final letter of Ignatius, due to him being martyred shortly after by wild animals in Rome. There is another letter called the Martyrdom of Ignatius, which I've not included in this book, but it is added as an appendix in my companion book. I'll read that. I'll add that to this video. I won't read it, I'll add it to the bottom in a link to the text, because it'd be quite long to read. Very interesting though. Which, I'll mention in a minute. Since I've mentioned it, here's a short overview of the aforementioned epistle. So, of the Martyrdom of Ignatius. Scholarly opinion is somewhat divided on the authenticity of it, with some accepting it as totally genuine, others partially, and some rejecting it completely. And there's a brief overview you can read online, which in the book I put as a footnote, and I'll add that as the link below in the description. In brief though, if it is genuine, the letter is supposed to be written by those who accompanied Ignatius on his travels through Asia Minor and who also witnessed the execution in Rome. After a lengthy trip, they eventually landed in Rome, where Ignatius was thus cast to the wild beasts. The believers in the city spent the whole night in tears and prayer to the Lord, and it is recorded in the closing chapter of the letter that some saw the blessed Ignatius after his death standing with them and embracing the group, and others beheld him again praying for them, and lastly some saw him sweating and standing by the Lord as though coming from a great labour. So a whole lot of that martyrdom letter explains what happened to him, obviously his death, but also how his friends and other church people that followed him, how they coped, and the visions they saw of him afterwards, post death, confirming his holiness, I guess, because they saw him with the Lord glorified. So whether you accept the genuineness of that letter or not, I think it gives a nice closure to the life of Ignatius, which we've been briefly following over the last few days. And if you read all of Ignatius' letters, start to finish, and then, I don't know, I felt like I was getting to know him personally. You sort of get to know, it feels like a pen pal almost. You got to know his thoughts and feelings, his desires. It's quite personal in the Romans letter. So sort of travelling with him on his last few, I don't know how long it would have taken, last few months maybe, across Asia Minor, reading what he thought. It affected me in a way, and reading the Martyrdom was a nice closure to sort of, see him off, if you like, knowing everything he went through and seeing that in the end of it he got to walk off into the sunset with Jesus, as it were. So that's the end of Ignatius's chapter. So tomorrow is day 12, and we're starting a new text, Justin Martyr. Might be a familiar name to some. He wrote an apology, but we'll get into that tomorrow. So if you like this, subscribe, support me on Patreon, buy the book, etc. Share the video even. That'll be nice. Get people to see it. Bye.